Coming up on this episode, the 2025 NBA playoffs have officially begun. I'll take a quick look back at all the results from Saturday's slate of games before getting into a huge playoff preview as the Golden State Warriors prepare to face the Houston Rockets in Game 1 at Toyota Center on Sunday. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. A couple of days off here since the Warriors secured their place in the 2025 playoffs with Tuesday night's victory over the Memphis Grizzlies, but now looking forward to getting back into it and following what is going to be a huge playoff campaign, not just for Golden State, but of course every other team. I feel like this postseason is perhaps going to be as exciting as we've ever seen with some of the huge first round matchups, particularly in the Western Conference, and the Warriors are certainly among that with a massive series coming up here against the Houston Rockets. However, before I get into that, just to look back at what I've watched across the course of today, I woke up at 6 a.m. here, Australian time, and basically got to watch the final 3 games of the 4-game slate. I wasn't really willing to get up at 3 a.m. to watch the Bucks versus the Pacers, but the Pacers did get the job done with a 117-98 victory there. You guys are going to have to let me know in the comments, for those of you that watched it, what the hell was going on with Kyle Kuzma, because he went completely statless in 22 minutes, 0 of 5 shooting. This is someone that we as Warrior fans have contemplated the idea of trading for him in the past when he was a member of the Washington Wizards. And fortunately, based on how he's played with Milwaukee, that wasn't the case, that he didn't become a Warrior, because this performance in Game 1 in Indiana, a flat-out disaster. I don't know. I feel like if I went out there for 22 minutes in a playoff game, I'd be able to get something. Probably not a point, but maybe I can sneak in for a rebound. Maybe, Giannis can just run the floor and I give the ball to him and get an assist. I don't know. I produced perhaps more sitting laying in bed, fast asleep, than Kyle Kuzma did basically on the court today for the Milwaukee Bucks. So, yeah, not a great result for them whatsoever. And that trade, I know Chris Middleton washed up these days, plenty of injury concerns and whatnot, but I'm sure the Bucks are probably regretting that decision. From a Warrior perspective, quick shout out to Ryan Rollins, of course, former Warrior guard who the franchise drafted with the 44th pick in 2022. He not only made his playoff debut for the Bucks today, but actually made the start at point guard with Damian Lillard obviously out with those blood clot issues, which should see him return hopefully in Game 2 or Game 3 from a Milwaukee perspective. But in his place, Ryan Rollins getting the start, 19 minutes, 5 rebounds, couple of rebounds, 3 assists. Not overly impactful, but of course a day of struggle in general for Milwaukee. So you can't really pinpoint or blame a young guard like Ryan Rollins, 22 years old, who has had quite a shock turnaround, given just over 12 months ago he was waived by the Washington Wizards, of course, part of that Chris Paul, Jordan Poole trade back on draft day in 2023. So really good to see him be able to turn his career around and become an impactful piece for the Milwaukee Bucks, to the point where he's now starting in a playoff game, which is quite incredible given where he was at just over 12 months ago. So didn't watch the game. If any of you guys have got any thoughts on Kyle Kuzma's performance, Ryan Rollins' performance, or anything else to do with that, then just let me know in the comments below. The game I did wake up for, was worth waking up for, was the Denver Nuggets getting a 112-110 overtime victory over the LA Clippers. Really classic performance. Russell Westbrook, just got to be the most hilarious player to watch in the league. It's really funny that, not only were the Nuggets living by Westbrook and dying by Westbrook down the stretch, but the Clippers were perfectly happy. Of course, the Clippers, being one of his former teams, were perfectly happy with just letting Russ do whatever he wanted down the stretch and just saying, well, if he makes some shots, does some good things, we're probably going to lose this game. Otherwise, we're backing ourselves in that he's just going to make mistake after mistake and we're going to win this game. And fortunately for Russ, it was like semi-50-50. He did a lot of bad things and then he did a lot of good things. Of course, the main one was probably putting the Nuggets up by 2 in the final 30 seconds of regulation with that corner 3. Just hilarious to watch. And from a Denver perspective, just way too much Westbrook down the stretch. And that's what the Clippers were giving them, I know, but at some point you've got to try something different, whether it's just taking him off the floor entirely. Like, you're basically playing Russian roulette in that situation. You're like, okay, you get away with this one, you get an overtime victory. He comes up with a big defensive play towards the end there where he kind of steals the ball and forces the ball out of bounds off Harden. Great, fantastic. Got a couple of clutch offensive rebounds, dove to the rim a couple of times, made a couple of layups off Jokic feeds, but really way too much Russell Westbrook from a Denver perspective. Absolutely hilarious to watch from a neutral fan's point of view. But if you're the Nuggets, you probably don't want to be living with that. And if you're the Clippers, yes, you lost this game, and yes, you'll be bitterly disappointed given you had a significant lead in the first half. But I wouldn't actually be too concerned with that. I think going forward here, I actually probably prefer the Clippers. I feel like I trust them a little bit more. In saying that, I think Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world, and Denver can certainly win this series, no doubt about that. I'd be a bit concerned with Kawhi from a Clippers perspective. Thought he was a little bit passive down the stretch, looked a bit tired. We'll wait and see, of course, what happens with him across the course of a series, and of course, the kind of physical health concerns that he's had over the course of a number of years now, and whether that impacts him eventually. We'll wait and see, but it didn't look great for him in the second half. But from a Clippers perspective, again, I wouldn't be overly concerned with losing that game. I'd be very disappointed, but I still think they're in a reasonable position here. And I ultimately think the Clippers will probably win this series, as hard as it is for me to say as a big Jokic fan, as a person who thinks Jokic is the best player in the world. I actually think the Clippers might take this series. The Pistons, they put up a great showing through the first three quarters against the New York Knicks, and I was thoroughly impressed with what they did. Obviously, so many of their young guys making their playoff debut at a big arena, perhaps, the biggest in the league in terms of Madison Square Garden. So the fact they were able to rise to the pressure early was fantastic. Entered the fourth with an 8-point lead, but unfortunately for them, bit of playoff inexperience came back to bite them down the stretch. The Knicks went on a 21-0 run there during the fourth quarter and completely took control of the game, ended up winding down with a 123-112 victory. It's one of those things. It's going to be fascinating to see the kind of spillover that fourth quarter might have to game two. My predictions would be that I'd expect the Knicks to win game two really, really easily. Like, I'd be looking for the Knicks to win maybe by 15 plus in game two, simply because I think as a team, as a favorite in a particular series like the Knicks are, game one can be a little bit of an issue sometimes. And if you can just grind out that first game and eventually get the win, which they did, that can really relieve some pressure. And therefore they can come out across the remainder of the series. They've got that first game in the bag now and play a little bit more freer and a bit more normal, I suppose, as opposed to the Pistons, who I guess can go into it thinking, okay, we're not under that much pressure. But they kind of are they were in that fourth quarter based on the fact, okay, you go in up 8, you should be winning from that position. And of course they crumbled. And I just wonder whether or not mentally that fourth quarter collapse could come back to play a bit of a factor in game two. And again, that's why I think I'd expect the Knicks to get a pretty reasonably, comfortable victory in game two. So full credit to the Pistons. I'm not expecting them to win this series. If they can, go back on their home floor, win a game or two, push it to 6. It's been a really, really good season for the Pistons, really, regardless of how this series goes. But they'll be certainly disappointed with how that fourth quarter played out at MSG. The last one, and perhaps the biggest surprise of the day, was the Minnesota Timberwolves getting a 117-95 victory over the Lakers. Luka Doncic came out big time in the first quarter, 16 points, had the Lakers up early, but from that point on, the Timberwolves just really took control, and really in a manner that I'd be concerned with if I was a Laker fan, because what we thought the negatives might have been after the Luka trade, to me, were on full display, with their defense really struggling, particularly in transition. I think the final result, points in transition or whatever, fast break points, were hugely lopsided to the Timberwolves. So they really got the game on their terms. And I think the defensive limitations that we thought might have been the case after the Luka trade, I think were certainly on display from a Laker perspective. And the fact that, the Timberwolves were able to get a 22-point victory without Anthony Edwards really doing anything. Like, he scored 22 points. He was reasonable, but it's not like he went off for 35 plus. Luka did. Luka had 37 in this game, and yet he scores 15 more than Ant, and his team loses by 22. So they need more from LeBron. They need more from Austin Reeves. But really, this was a victory of a deep roster overcoming and completely obliterating in the final three quarters a star-studded roster of top three players. And really from there, the Lakers don't have a whole lot. And particularly when you compare the benches and you've got, Gabe Vincent, Jared Vanderbilt, these guys who are reasonable players, but they're nothing of the standard of a Naz Reid and a Dante DiVincenzo. And you've got a guy like McDaniels, who's obviously a key part for them, a starting caliber player, going for 25 points and 9 rebounds. You just see the supplementary pieces here for the Timberwolves playing a big factor in this game and just simply overpowering anything the Lakers had, and particularly with LeBron and Austin Reeves not at their best. Like, those top three guys for the Lakers have to play excellent basketball in order for them to win. And if they don't, Minnesota are going to be on top. So this is going to be a super fascinating series. I think it might go 6 or 7. Of course, the winner of that will play the winner of the Warriors-Rockets series, so huge eyes on that from a Golden State perspective. Talking of the Warriors, let's get into a big playoff preview here as they prepare to face the Rockets at Toyota Center on Sunday. Thoroughly looking forward to this one. I am cautiously optimistic, I suppose. The Warriors are actually, this is not your traditional 2v7 matchup, because Golden State with the bookies are actually favorites as the 7th seed, which I can understand, right? I can understand why the Warriors are favorites, but I can also see, if you're a Rockets fan, why you'd have some confidence in your team winning as well. I think this is going to be a super close series. I think it might go 6 or 7. I think it would at least go 6, could potentially go to 7. It's going to be absolutely massive, of course, as I said, the winner to face the winner of the Timberwolves and Lakers in the second round, and then potentially the Thunder in the West Finals if one of these teams can get that far, and if the Thunder advance as expected in the other part of the draw there in the playoffs. So 4 things for me that I want to look at from a Warrior perspective here in terms of trying to win this series, and what I think is going to be pivotal to winning this series. And beyond looking at it from an individual matchup perspective, we've got so many different matchups we can look at. Steph, Amen Thompson, Draymond and Şengün. Like, those two, I think, are probably the key matchups from an individual perspective, as this series progresses here. But more so than that, I want to look at it from a team standpoint and just the varying styles, and the big factor of Golden State trying to get the game on their terms and trying to get lineups that are really on their terms, because this is 2 very, very different teams in the way they play. The Rockets, we know, very defensive minded, as are the Warriors, to be fair, but the Rockets really hang their hat on defense with their size, their athleticism, their youthful energy. They are going to try and make this, as we saw, earlier in the month at Chase Center, a really slow defensive style game where the Rockets eventually got a 106-96 victory. I think in the 3 of the 5 games that these teams have played in the regular season, of course, they had that extra matchup with the play-in tournament. I think the Warriors scored at less than 100 points in 3 of those. So we've seen that the Rockets have kind of got the game in their kind of style, but whether they then have the offense to actually take advantage of that, we'll wait and see. But from a Warrior perspective, the biggest concern, I suppose, from me, from just a team standpoint, we saw them in the final 2 games here against the Clippers in the regular season finale, and then the Grizzlies in the play-in tournament. They got smashed on the glass, 92-64 in terms of total rebounds across the course of those 2 games. Now, the Warriors throughout the regular season have actually been an excellent rebounding team, finished 7th in both total rebounds and rebound percentage. So it hasn't been a concern necessarily across the course of the regular season. But playing this small ball lineup with Draymond at center, as they're going to lean more and more into, and as they have leaned more and more into over the recent weeks, when they come up against a really big team, it's going to be a concern. We saw Zubac go for 22 and 17 in that final regular season game. We saw Zach Edey go for 14 and 17 in the play-in game. So it's going to be a big factor here in terms of whether the Warriors can continue to go small and get the game on their terms and make it a small ball battle, because if that's the case, then things are probably going to work out pretty well for them. But if they can't, and the Rockets really dominate on the glass, really use their size, that's where Houston are going to gain an advantage here across the course of this series. The one thing that's really going to fascinate me is Ime Udoka's really interesting two-man combination of Steven Adams and Alperen Şengün playing together. To me, that's a combination that should not work, right? There's too many offensive limitations to me in terms of the lack of shooting between those two for that to really work. And I'm going to be fascinated to see if it does in the playoffs. However, the minutes they've played together during the regular season, it's been something that's kind of really come to fruition over recent weeks here. They have a 29.9 net rating in, I think it might be 165 minutes where Şengün and Adams have shared the floor together, right? That's incredible. 29.9 net rating. Absolutely unbelievable. And so to me, I think about it on paper and I think, well, that shouldn't work. But the numbers would suggest that it certainly does for Houston, right? And so if you're the Warriors, you have to make sure that two-man combination is completely non-viable, right? And the only way you can do that is really hunting them defensively. If you're Steph, you're Jimmy, maybe the Warriors have to run some more pick and rolls, get Şengün in the action, see if he can guard Steph, if he wants to come up to the level of screen. Obviously, Draymond can slip out of that and make decisions out of that if Şengün does, whether it's Jimmy trying to get switches onto Şengün or Adams. We know Jimmy's ability to try and hunt mismatches in this series is going to be a big factor. So the Warriors need to try and exploit that duo defensively and therefore try and make it completely non-viable. Because if Ime Udoka can get away with playing Şengün and Adams significant minutes together, that's not a great thing for the Warriors, right? Because we know when those two guys are out there, the Warriors are probably going to get smashed on the glass. They're going to pound the offensive boards, and things are going to become really problematic for Golden State. So that's something that if you're the Warriors, you might see that, let's say, at the start of the second quarter tomorrow in game one. The Warriors need to make sure from the outside, we're winning these minutes. We're winning these minutes, and we're making sure that Ime Udoka, you better put that aside. You better put that back in your back pocket and not be able to use that again for the rest of the series, right? Because the numbers would suggest that duo is really good, 29.9 net rating. But I still have question marks whether or not it's going to be effective against Golden State. It might be simply because of the size that they can therefore throw and the ability to absolutely smack them on the glass. But at the same time, I think there are defensive concerns. I think there are things the Warriors can do to make that two-man combination completely unplayable as the series progresses. The other thing, I suppose, is the three-point shooting. So the Warriors took the second most three-point attempts in the league across the course of the regular season, behind only the Boston Celtics, obviously. The Rockets were 20th. They were also 21st in percentage. Again, this comes down to a size thing, right? Can the Warriors keep the Rockets out of the paint and force them into a heap of three-point shots? Because we know they aren't a great three-point shooting team. If that's the case, absolutely good things for the Warriors can happen, right? On the other end, can the Rockets keep the Warriors off the three-point line? Can they funnel them into the paint where, again, they can use their size, they can use their athleticism to make things really difficult on the Warriors, right? So the three-point shooting battle on both ends, whether the Rockets can prevent the Warriors' three-point shooting and whether the Warriors can actually force more three-point shooting upon the Rockets, I think that's going to be certainly a huge thing to monitor here in terms of the stylistic aspects of both teams. My second point here, so my first obviously being the Warriors getting the game on their own terms. The second thing here, the Warriors have to put themselves in position where their experience becomes a real factor. And if you're a Golden State fan, to me, I'm obviously a Warrior fan, the biggest reason for optimism in this series and why I think Golden State will win this series is because they have way more playoff experience, and specifically because they have the best two players on the floor, in my opinion, or what should be the best two players on the floor in Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler. And so what I mean by put yourself in a position where playoff experience becomes a real factor, look at what happened to the Pistons today, right? They were great throughout the first three quarters. Absolutely fantastic. Again, a lot of their young guys playing in their playoff debuts. Fantastic. Led by 8 entering the fourth quarter, right? Fantastic. But then when the game was really on the line, right, when it was there to be taken, when they should have won, what happened? They crumbled. They allowed a 21-0 run and the Knicks run away with an 11-point win when it looked like the Pistons almost had the game under control entering the fourth quarter, right? And so a similar thing could happen to the Rockets, who, again, Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, all making their playoff debuts, all perhaps the three most important players on the Rockets. Obviously, they've got some experienced guys. Fred VanVleet's an NBA champion. Dylan Brooks has extensive playoff experience. It's not like they're a team, full of young guys, but a lot of their key players are going to be, this is a new occasion to them, right? And so to me, if you're Golden State, I'm not saying that the Warriors are that much better than the Rockets, that they're going to be able to blow the Rockets off the floor and just win, every game easily. As a Warrior fan, I think the expectation should be, let's just try and keep it close. Let's keep it close in as many of these games as we can. If we can, smack them off the floor and be up 30 at the end of three quarters, great. But that's not really realistic. Like, these two teams are, pretty close, I think, in terms of quality. So, yes, we can hope that the Warriors are up 20-30 at the end of three quarters. That's not overly realistic, right? If it happens, great. Probably not going to happen. Can you try and keep these games close so that with 5 minutes to go, you've got a tie ball game or whatever? And then who do you trust down the stretch? Do you trust a former clutch player of the year, 4-time champion Steph Curry, and a proven playoff, perhaps the best playoff performer in the last 5 years in Jimmy Butler? Or do you trust Jalen Green, who can still come and go with his offense somewhat, who's never played in a playoff game before, and Alperen Şengün, who is a post-up type, old-school kind of player who, again, like Green, has no playoff experience? Who are you going to trust in that situation? I think most neutral fans would say, okay, I'd probably take Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, right? And again, that's why, if you're the Warriors, that's what you're pointing to in terms of winning this series. It's last 5 minutes. Who do you trust more? I'm taking Steph and Jimmy, and I'm sure a lot of people would. Add in the fact that the Rockets are bottom, dead last in the league in field goal percentage in clutch situations. Dead last in field goals. So their offense in the clutch is no good. It is really no good. And so, again, if you're the Warriors, you try and get these games into a situation where playoff experience really becomes a key factor. The other aspect of this, to me, is history between these two teams. Now, this is a completely different Rockets team to the one we saw in the late 2010s with James Harden and Chris Paul and Trevor Ariza and whoever else you want to include as part of that Rockets team, PJ Tucker, whatever else. The Warriors obviously had the wood over the Rockets, a couple of amazing series, right? But the Warriors eventually got the job done in those couple of series late in the 2010s. Now, this is a completely different Rockets team. I'm not expecting these Houston players to have any ill effects from a series that they, most of these guys weren't even in the league, right? 6, 7, 8 years ago when those series were taking place. However, the Houston fans from that point in time, still the Houston fans today, right? And so, particularly on the road, particularly at Toyota Center, you make a really you make a great start to the game, or you at least have the game really close down the stretch. There's going to be some tension. There's going to be some anxiety in the atmosphere at Toyota Center of Rockets fans seeing Steph Curry, seeing Draymond Green and thinking, shit, here we go again, right? And could that particularly filter into the players on the floor and the young Rocket players who are inexperienced? Potentially, yes. So, again, I'm not saying the Rockets players themselves are going to have ill effects from what we've seen 7, 8 years ago between these two teams. But what I do think could happen is the atmosphere in the air, the tension among fans in the bleachers, that could potentially infiltrate down to the court and play a factor here. So this is, again, Warriors need to put themselves in position where their playoff experience, where Steph Curry, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, we know what they've done. We know where they've been, right? That's what they need to do. They need to put themselves in position where it becomes a real factor. Because we've seen with the Pistons today, through the first half, through the first three quarters, young teams, they can kind of play freely, right? They can play without necessarily too much expectation. But when the game's on the line, that becomes a different story. We saw that with Detroit today. The third thing I want to look at is really simple and something that every series comes down to, and that's role players. Can the role players hit shots, right? But I think that's going to be even more important for Golden State when you consider they're coming up against a top 5 defense with some really long, young, athletic defenders. We saw what Aman Thompson did to Steph Curry a couple of weeks ago at Chase Center. Is that going to happen again? No, not to that level necessarily, but at the same time, like, we could see Steph have a couple of quiet games here. We know the Rockets are going to try and funnel shots out of Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler's hands And two, Moses Moody, Brandon Pajemski, Buddy Hield, Quinton Post, Gary Payton II, and whoever else is on the floor from a Warrior, Draymond Green, they're going to try and filter shots in that direction rather than have Steph and Jimmy beat them, right? We know that's going to happen. And we know the Warriors are going to come with a plan to try and make sure, hey, Steph and Jimmy still get plenty of shots up. And we've seen what they did against the Clippers, what they did against the Grizzlies combined for 75 points were massive, right? So, yes, Steph and Jimmy are going to play a huge role in this series, no doubt. Like, they're the best two players potentially on the court for both teams. But the role players' ability to take advantage of the open shots that Steph and Jimmy are going to create is going to be a real big swing factor here. And you've seen, particularly, look at a guy like Moses Moody, 30% from three across his last 15 games of the regular season for Moses Moody. His shooting has really tailed off here in an unfortunate and potentially concerning manner here entering the playoffs. Kind of the opposite for Pods. Pods is like 49% over his last 15 games. Gary Payton II's been great, 43.7% or something like that. Quinton Post, we know how excellent he was, across the course of the entire regular season with his three-point shooting. Obviously, young big man, rookie center. Can that translate to a high-pressure environment in the playoffs, particularly if it's on the road? We'll wait and see. Buddy Hield, we know, comes and goes with his three-point shooting and overall offense. So that's going to be the thing to me. Can Moses Moody, 5 minutes left, game tied, you get a wide-open corner three. Can you knock it down? Right? Draymond, can you knock it down? Can you find the balance? We heard Draymond say the other day in that game against the Grizzlies, he took a corner three or whatever. And then afterwards he said, Steph came up to me and basically said, don't take that shot, right? Let's get something else. But there are going to be times, the end of the shot clock, right? Draymond finds himself in the corner. You've got to heave it up and you've got to try and make the shot. Moses, Pods, we know those guys are more known as shooters and therefore can they knock them down? Quinton Post the same, Buddy Hield the same. We know GP2. He's been really, really good from three since the All-Star break. And not only that, but he's been taking a heap of threes as well, simply because we know the defense is going to be like, corner three, Gary Payton II, go for your life, right? If you can beat us through that, fine, no worries. And so that is going to be a huge swing factor. And it's going to be the case for both teams as well, because the Warriors are going to have a heap of guys who they can leave wide open as well. Like Amen Thompson, okay, cool, you can guard Steph Curry all game, go for your life. But you know what? We're going to try and make you a complete offensive liability because we're not going to guard you from three-point range whatsoever. Tari Eason, maybe the same thing, right, when you're out there. Okay, yeah, they got some shooters like you're going to be guarding Dylan Brooks, Van Vliet, Jalen Green, but Şengün, Draymond's going to be guarding Şengün, saying to him, mate, you launch as many threes as you want. Okay, I'm not buying into it whatsoever. Right, so this is all part of the kind of stylistic stuff, both from a team and individual matchup standpoint. That's going to be so fascinating in this series. The last thing that I want to point to here, and it really comes down to Steve Kerr. And I know you guys, I know Warrior fans, so often talk about Steve Kerr and so often in a negative light. Look, I'm not a Steve Kerr hater. In fact, I love Steve Kerr. He's a 4-time championship winning coach of this team. And I think he gets way too much criticism for what he's been able to do for this franchise, right? When you just balance the good and bad across the course of 10, 11 years here. However, I have been a little bit concerned with a couple of things he's done recently. And I just want him to be kind of flexible in this playoff series, right? And a couple of the things that I've seen over the past few games have concerned me a little bit. The biggest one was the GP2 thing when he closed with GP2 against the Clippers and particularly against James Harden in that final regular season game. James Harden was absolutely cooking GP2, right? GP2 had no answer for him whatsoever. And I'm not sure if he's not giving you that defensively, then I'm not sure what he's on the floor because we know teams aren't going to guard him offensively, right? And so to me, that was one where I was like, I don't know why GP2's on the floor here over a Moody or a Guy Santos, or I think Moody was probably the one, right? But don't take that as me being a GP2 hater. Like there are a heap of comments from you guys in the YouTube on the YouTube channel basically saying, oh, you're a GP2 hater or you don't like GP2, whatever else. I love GP2. I love him. And he's going to be closing some of these games. He's going to be playing some big minutes at particular scenarios, but he shouldn't be locked into being part of the closing lineup, right? And if he's not playing well, if he's not bringing you the defense that you have him on the floor to do in terms of guarding certain guys, like guarding a guy like Jalen Green or whatever else, then again, he's such an offensive limitation that you shouldn't be having him on the floor. So to me, that closing him in that Clippers game was a complete mistake from Steve Kerr, and just went back to, Steve really, really trusting GP2 in a manner that he doesn't with a guy like, let's say, Moses still, right? Even though Moses played more minutes than GP2 in that game, like when it came down to crunch time, when the Warriors needed to win, he went to GP2, right? So I just want Steve to be flexible with some of this stuff. I like, looking at a positive thing. I like what he did against the Grizzlies with giving heavy minutes to Quentin Post and the balance he tries to find there between, Kevon Looney and Quentin Post in terms of the bench minutes from the center position. That's going to be super interesting to me because it looked before that Grizzlies game over the final few games of the regular season like it was starting to trend back towards Loon. I think in the final 4 regular season games where both players had been active, obviously QP missed a couple of games through on us, but in the 4 games they were active together to end the regular season, Loon played more minutes than Post. That was a bit of an issue for me because I still think if the Warriors want to get their absolute best, reach their absolute best, get to their absolute highest upside, I think QP just opens up so many things for them that he should be playing more minutes than Loon. And it was good to see that happen against the Grizzlies on Tuesday where QP played nearly 22 minutes. I think Loon was around 10 or whatever else. And he was really good. And he showed that he could, stand up to that stage and have a big impact. Had 3 threes in the first half. I think he had 11 points, 5 rebounds, was an equal team high plus 12 for the game. So to me, I'd be trying to use him as much as possible, or at least more so than Loon. I think in terms of that 3-point shooting stuff and the fact that Steph and Jimmy, the defense is going to hone into them. I think Quentin Post could become even more important in a series like this. But we'll wait and see. I just don't want the default from Steve to be young guys out, veterans in, even when, there's going to be situations that call for that, but only do it when it calls for that. Don't do it just out of your absolute 10-year history, right? Of, I've seen GP2 and Loon do it before, so, I'm just going to default to them. Right, because I think that's going to be the most frustrating things for fans, right, is if you just go back to those guys, not because the game calls for it, but because you know what they've done in the past. And I know, history does come into this, right? Absolutely comes into this. But there's still got to be some maneuverability, some flexibility in terms of your rotation decisions. And I think some of that stuff with GP2 and Loon as the veteran guys compared to some of the young guys like a Santos, a Post, a Pajemski, a Moody. Let's put Kuminga into that. We haven't, I've gone over half an hour in this podcast, haven't mentioned Jonathan Kuminga once. And because I don't really think he's going to play a role early in this series. The history suggests we're not. The last 2 games, right? Didn't get minutes against the Clippers, didn't get minutes against the Grizzlies. However, I do buy into the fact that, hey, there's probably going to be a time in this series where the Rockets' size and athleticism and youthful energy is going to become a problem for the Warriors, and therefore you're going to have to try and match that. So as much as I haven't spoken about Jonathan Kuminga, do I think he might play a role in this series? Yeah, I think he might play a role, and it's going to be up to him to take advantage of that first opportunity you get. Because if we know absolutely that if Jonathan Kuminga does get an opportunity, but comes out and in 2 or 3 minutes makes 3 or 4 mistakes, his backside's going to be back on the bench that quickly, and he's not going to be seen again, right? So the pressure on him when he gets an opportunity in this playoff series is going to be really, really important. I don't know, could Steve, I've really been kind of playing this in my head a little bit. Is there less kind of pressure on tomorrow's game than there was final game against the Clippers or Tuesday night's game against the Grizzlies? There probably is less pressure because if you go down 1-0 on the road in a playoff series, it's not the end of the world. However, losing Sunday's game against the Clippers was really disappointing because it meant they went through the play-in tournament. And then if they'd lost Tuesday's game against the Grizzlies, then their season was practically over, right? Because the best thing you could do is face the Thunder in the first round. So you actually have bought yourself a little bit of time here in terms of maybe you could experiment a little bit in game 1 tomorrow. Maybe that experimentation does include, hey, JK, I know we benched you over the last 2 games, but you know what? If things go terribly in game 1 for you and the team, it's not the end of the world. But maybe, I can give you a few minutes here and you get re-engaged from it and you actually give me something. You might have a really good 5-6 minute stint. All of a sudden, I've opened up something new in terms of Jonathan Kuminga can be a real factor in this series, right? So that's going to be interesting to me to see whether or not he actually, Steve kind of throws him a bone and actually says start of the second quarter, or, maybe a few minutes later in the second quarter, or even, a few minutes earlier in the first half, and says, all right, I made these two decisions in terms of benching you against the Clippers and Grizzlies because they were absolute must-win situations. It's a playoff game. It's a playoff game. It's huge, right? No one's trying to downplay the importance of it. Well, maybe I am a little bit because, again, yes, game one's big, but if you go down 1-0 on the road, again, it's not a complete disaster. This time 2 years ago, we saw the Warriors lose the first two games to the Sacramento Kings, came back and won in 7. Is it an ideal? No, absolutely not. I'd much rather just win tomorrow, right, and get home court advantage through that. But it does potentially offer you a little bit of an opportunity to give Jonathan Kuminga some minutes, maybe give Guy Santos some minutes. We know he has not played in a playoff game before. So we'll wait and see. Does it mean Steve Kerr should be going 11 deep in the rotation? Probably not. But there is some opportunity here to maybe potentially throw JK a bone, throw Guy a bone, and see what they can do in some early first half minutes where the pressure is going to be big, yes, but it's not an absolute must-win situation. But I do think, in terms of that flexibility, if you are getting out-rebounded, out-hustled by the younger Rockets squad, throw Guy out there, right? We know that's kind of his forte in terms of scrapping for loose balls, getting on the offensive boards, these kind of things. If you need to match the size and athleticism of the Rockets, then throw JK out there. And most importantly, just ride the hot hand, right? Ride who's playing well throughout the course of a game. Again, the GP2 decision against the Clippers, I just didn't think was the right one because GP2 wasn't doing anything defensively. And of course, he's going to be an offensive limitation. Look, if Buddy Hield comes out in the first half and shoots 3 or 4 from distance and plays really well and is like a +8 or something in his first half minutes, give him some lengthy second half minutes. I don't care about that. I'm not saying Buddy Hield's had a very inconsistent year. And I've always said, okay, you've got to ride him when he's playing well and just shit his backside when he's not, right? And so that's going to be the thing. You just got to be flexible. You've got to make decisions in a timely manner, not when they're too late, when the game's already over. So I know it's going to be super, super interesting here. I don't know. I think it's going to be a lot tougher than maybe what some Warrior fans suggest. I am going in with the expectation of Golden State winning the series and advancing, and the bookies would also suggest that. So it's not like I'm saying this off absolute blind hope, right? There are legitimate reasons why the Warriors can win, and I think the biggest one when it comes, you can throw everything out the door, and the biggest reason to me is they should have the best two players in this series. And if you have the best two players in this series, to me, there's no excuse you're losing, right? At least if you're like the Lakers today, is Ant Edwards in the argument to be a better player potentially than LeBron James at this point? Potentially two-way? Maybe, yeah. Maybe Anthony Edwards is a better player than LeBron James, and therefore the Lakers don't actually have the two best players in this series, right? Maybe, if you're Anthony Edwards, you think you're the best player, right, in that series. From the Warriors-Rockets perspective, Alperen Şengün an all-star this year. Fantastic, had a great year. I don't think Alperen Şengün can tie the shoelaces of Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler when it comes to a playoff matchup. I don't, okay? Again, that might be harsh to me. That might be coming at it from with the Warrior glasses on for sure. But that's just how I feel. And again, if you've got the best two players in the series, I just don't think you should be losing, right? In saying that, I think Houston's defense, I think their youth, their size, their athleticism is going to be troublesome for Golden State at different points. That's why I can certainly see it going at least 6, if not 7 games. But hopefully the Warriors can pull out a victory in advance to either face the Timberwolves or the Lakers. I'll finish it up there, guys. Thank you very much. If you've got through the entire episode here, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POC252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter. I'll be back for a post-game live after the game tomorrow. Let's hope the Warriors can get a game 1 victory, would certainly ease the nerves a little bit. Hope to see you then, and otherwise continue to enjoy your weekend.